Well, welcome to Julie Christansen's session called Understanding Systemic Challenges and Being Proactive Can Make a Difference. This is session 3, stream 2. My name is Helena Kamika, and I will be your moderator for this session. If this is not the session you wanted to attend, you will be able to find all of the sessions in the menu on your left. Click on the session tab and then select the session you want to attend. It's my pleasure to introduce the speaker for this session, Julie Christansen. Julie is an award-winning international public speaker, author, and psychotherapist. She developed the Anger Solutions method of anger resolution and has authored several books about anger, stress, bullying, and coping with crisis. Her work has landed her on the list of the 30 most influential forensic psychologists practicing today. Due to the graphic and sensitive nature of Julie's presentation, it's not suitable for all viewers. Some people may be triggered by the content, and we ask that you view at your own discretion. There is a support person available to connect with should you feel you need to process after this session. You can find their booth in the exhibit hall in the column on your left, or simply inquire at the Abuse Hurts booth in the exhibit hall. Okay, welcome, Julie. We're so looking forward to your talk today.
Thank you so much, Helena. I'm so happy to be a part of this conference. I understand that things have been going swimmingly today, that the feedback has been great so far, and I hope that I can make a positive contribution to everything that has been said and shared today. So today, I really want to take a look at how we close the gaps. This is a study of failed prevention. I am grateful for the trigger warning because this story does not have a happy ending. It certainly is a cautionary tale in several ways, and I'm hoping that although the story itself doesn't have a happy ending, that we'll be able to learn some things and to make some changes. So due to my relationship to this particular case, I have changed the names of the people involved. We're just going to look at John and Jane Doe. I mean, it's public record. However, I do have a professional attachment to this case. So what we want to do in the time that we have is to talk a little bit about John and Jane Doe, a brief history of their relationship and what went wrong in terms of how the story ended, and what we can learn, and then look at some low-hanging fruit. I know that there are things that we could do in terms of different policy, changes in the law, those sorts of things, but those are not the strategies that we can implement immediately. So I want to look at some things that we could do that are simple, immediate changes that do not require policymakers to get involved and spend, months and months debating whether or not it's the right policy or the wording is correct. These are things that we can do immediately to close the gaps in protection of our most vulnerable. So this story of John and Jane Doe, this is a 72-year-old woman who was married 44 years to her husband. They were estranged after a separation. She had endured abuse for many, many years, probably from the beginning of the marriage, and strangely enough, or ironically enough, had assisted several women in escaping their own abusive marriages, but she always stayed in hers. So we're going to look at the events because she couldn't take the anxiety that came from being in the same space with her abusive father. So she checked out. She said, I'm done. I will not be bringing my children and exposing them to this environment. I need to do this for my own health and for the protection of my children, so I'm out. I believe that was at the point where Jane said, it's time for me to think about why I'm still in this relationship and perhaps make a move to leave myself. And so she did. She stayed at a local women's shelter, and then went off to live with family in another city and was relatively safe. But there were some lapses in vigilance, and some red flags were ignored or minimized, and there was an inadvertent information leak. So let's talk first about the lapses in vigilance. And I here we go. So we know that the most dangerous time for a victim of domestic violence is when she leaves the relationship. Evidence shows that domestic violence continues even when the victim seeks professional help or tries to escape. In fact, it often intensifies because abusers become more threatening. They stalk their victims even more. And it was found that women are in the most danger after the escape, with some of them being murdered even after restraining orders have been sent out. And that was what happened in this case. It's also interesting to note that older adults are also vulnerable to intimate partner violence, which tends to become more severe and dangerous with time. And I think this is a statistic that we don't spend a lot of time examining. Even as I was researching some statistics for this presentation, I noticed that most of the statistics were focused on younger women with young children. And there wasn't a whole lot to speak to elder abuse or older adults being victim to intimate partner violence or domestic violence. So this is an interesting note. And I think that that is why there were some lapses in vigilance, because there was this misconception, if you will, that because the husband was old, that he was incapable of that type of violence. And I understand that, you know, we are capable of heinous things, all of us, regardless of our age or our physical ability for that matter. But we do have these stereotypes that we hold dear in society. And one of them is that old is equal to weak. And so because there was this misconception that an old man couldn't possibly do his wife harm, then the red flags that showed up were ignored. So other lapses in vigilance. Let's take a peek here. So the first thing that is of note is that when Jane left the marital home and went into shelter, John was still able to reach her through her email account. And I still have in my possession in my office a stack, probably about 2.5 inches thick, of emails that he sent to her. He emailed her every day, several times a day, even though after she had left him, he had moved on with his life. He had found himself another partner and was living with this partner, but still emailing his wife every day and saying, I miss you. Excuse me. I miss you. I'm depressed. The animals are depressed. When are you coming home? 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 And it was just relentless. And so she responded because she was trying to get him to leave her alone, but his relentless nature of constantly contacting her kept her engaged with him. So he was able to continue that sort of mental abuse through the email system. When she moved away from the region, she was relatively safe with family protecting her, and her guard came down. So she began to feel like the danger was past. And so she decided she wanted to live closer to her children and her grandchildren. So she moved back into the region to live independently. That was a lapse in vigilance, because just because this feels horrible to say, but just because you feel like everything is safe doesn't necessarily mean that it is. But she was, you know, I've lived this long, I've been away and everything seems normal. He's gone on with his life, so I should be fine. And so she came back to the region and she was living independently and was very happy living independently, finally having some freedom to live her life the way that she wanted. But there were some red flags. So one was that John had inferred on several occasions, both in writing through email and just in conversation with his children, that he might resort to violence. In one case, he actually said out loud that he was happy to spend the rest of his life in jail. All of these comments were reported to police, but as I said, because he's an old man and they thought that, you know, old men can't commit violent crimes, they were minimized or they were ignored. They were sort of brushed off. Well, maybe he didn't mean that, that sort of thing. The emails were also delivered to police, indicating his disregard for the no contact order, because there was a restraining order in place. And sending emails was a violation of the no contact order. But it's possible that his attempts to communicate with her were ignored because she continued to engage with him, right? So if she's continuing to talk to him, they're probably thinking, well, it can't be that bad. And there honestly was not anything blatantly threatening in the emails. It just sounded on the surface like a man who desperately missed his wife. And so those were ignored. The other red flag that's really interesting in this case is that John had gone to a physician and he had spoke of having severe depression and anxiety because of this breakup. And so many medications were prescribed for him, and he always reported that he was taking them. But after he was arrested for the murder of his wife, all of the pills were found and not a single one had been taken. Right. And he had been functioning. It's not like he was openly depressed and severely anxious and really struggling, but refusing to medicate. He didn't need the medication and they hadn't been taken. So just going back, so she moved into an apartment. She was living independently. She was doing well. And the separation proceedings were moving forward. So here's where we have the lapse in the information leak. So her address was listed mistakenly on a separation document. And that was how John was able to learn where she was living now. He was able to stalk her, follow her, study her movements, and lay in wait for her on the day that she died. So these are the circumstances surrounding the case. And I don't want to go too deep into the details of what happened to this poor woman because it is upsetting and it is triggering. And so I'll just gloss it over if that's okay. Just to say that she was out shopping for groceries and he was there in wait for her. And it's, it's really interesting that the evidence when they collected it was so blatantly him. He wasn't even trying to hide the fact. It wasn't like someone trying to commit the perfect crime. He was very brazen about it. He went to Canadian Tire and bought a knife set, because they were on sale, and looked straight up at the security camera as he made the purchase. So he wasn't trying to hide his face. He wasn't trying to disguise himself. He really felt like he was entitled to do whatever he was going to do. He borrowed a vehicle and used that vehicle to go to her home because he knew that she would recognize his personal vehicle. So it was clearly premeditated. It wasn't a crime of passion. He waited for her. He knew when she had left, he waited for her to come back, and then he stabbed her several times and watched her as she died. And fortunately, there was an eyewitness who was able to call 911 and to report, what had happened, but also to identify him as the murderer. After this happened, he went to his daughter's home and basically said, "This is all your fault. I've done something terrible. This is your fault why this has happened." He didn't say what had happened. However, he wouldn't leave the property. And so police were called and they picked him up. And then the gruesome details of the crime came to light. It is honestly such a sad story that this poor woman, after 44 years in a horrific marriage, was able to find freedom and have maybe a few months before her life was brutally taken from her, all because someone felt entitled. He felt entitled to have her in his life, even though he was happily moved on with someone else. It wasn't okay for her to be happy in her life without him. And so he took her life. And that is really shameful. So I want to talk a little bit about how we can close the gaps. And I want to start with just in the health sector. So we have some recommendations from the World Health Organization for the health sector. And I have a picture of grapes here because I do feel like this is the low-hanging fruit that I was talking about. This is easy pickings right here. Providing comprehensive services and sensitization and training healthcare providers in responding to the needs of survivors holistically and empathetically. So it looks like this. It looks like in medical conferences, whether it's the AMA or it's, McMaster University or Brock University, whoever is putting on these conferences for medical professionals, to include information about how to spot the indicators that someone is experiencing domestic violence and how to respond. It's one thing to be able to identify that someone is going through intimate partner violence. It's another thing to know how to respond when you see that. Too often, and I want to be careful because there may be some medical professionals watching this, and I don't want you to think that I don't respect the profession, because I do, but I realize that particularly in Ontario, our healthcare professionals are so overwhelmed. So overwhelmed. There's so much pressure. There are not enough doctors for the number of patients who need care. And it's relentless, right? Just people coming in, needing medical services, complex cases, et cetera, et cetera. Still, there needs to be enough empathy and enough care to say, this person is in distress, and I need to just take a second. I need to just take a beat and listen and find out what's really going on here. I need to know what questions I should ask. And I also need to know who's in the community that I can refer this person to. How can I support them now? And how can I refer them to people who can give them the appropriate support? Right? I'm a psychotherapist. And when I walk into my doctor's office, I see resources for pregnancy, and I see resources for colon cancer, and I see resources for all of these health issues, but I don't see any resources for people who have mental health issues. And I don't see any resources for people who may be experiencing intimate partner violence. That's just with my own doctor. When I go to walk-in clinics and I take them brochures for my practice or postcards for my practice, I get lots of referrals because I'm the only one. I'm the only one giving these people the referral information. So of course, when someone says I have a mental health problem, or I have anxiety, or I'm feeling depressed, it's the only resource in their office, in their clinic. And so of course they're going to hand that one out, and the referral comes to us. That's great for my bottom line in terms of business, but what about all of the other people who are not going to clinics that have those resources handy? So why not make those resources available? Why not have a little resource bank in every medical office, in every walk-in clinic, that just says, if you need help in this area, here's some resources for you. We can get those resources free of charge from organizations like 211 Niagara, right? Or 211 Toronto, or whatever community you live in. If you've got one of those clearinghouses of information with regards to social services, you can call them and say, I need resources for the local women's shelter. I need referral information for these particular organizations who can help women in crisis, or help men in crisis, or same-sex partners who are in crisis. Where are those resources? Can you send me some? And then make those things available to your patients. That is low-hanging fruit. That's easy. We can prevent recurrence of violence through early identification of women and children who are experiencing violence, and provide appropriate support. We can do that. That's easy, right? When we see people with unexplained bruises, when you hear a woman say, oh, it's nothing, I just fell down the stairs, but they've fallen down the stairs 4 times this month, that shouldn't take rocket science to just ask some questions. Okay, so how do we ask the questions? We can start with, is everything okay? Can I talk to you for a moment in private? Would you like to go for a coffee? Right? I've noticed that you've fallen down the stairs 4 times this month. Are you sure it's really falling down the stairs, or have the stairs been falling into you? Right? Did you run into a wall, or did you run into a fist? We need to establish rapport so that women will trust us. I keep saying women, and I understand that it's not just women who experience intimate partner violence, so forgive me. So when people who are experiencing intimate partner violence are approached, they may not want to share because there's fear there. So we can acknowledge that and say, hey, I understand you're scared. And I promise you that you can trust me. I just want to support you. I just want to help you. Maybe we can be armed with some of our own resources. I mean, there's so much stuff on the internet that we can just pull down. You can go to the World Health Organization and pull down their recommendations, but you can go to any women's shelter website or any clearinghouse site that has anything to do with domestic violence or intimate partner violence and pull down a safety plan recommendation and share that with someone, right? You can go on the internet and just Google, oh gosh, now that I want to say it, it just popped out of my head, the cycle of abuse, that chart, and just sit down with someone and say, do you realize that you were working and then your partner asked you to stop working so you could be home for the kids, that he would take care of you? Do you realize that now you don't have access to your own money? Do you see that these things that are happening are part of this cycle of abuse? Do you want to stay in this, or do you want to move out? Do you want to get yourself free of this so that you can live the life that you're meant to live? We can offer support, we can offer motivation, we can offer leverage, we can do those things, and it costs us nothing, and it requires no systemic changes. These are all things that we can do on our own. And then looking at law enforcement, how do we close the gaps here? Again, this is the low-hanging fruit. First, I would say that restraining orders and no contact orders must be easier to obtain for those who are at risk. I was out to Manitoba in March, and I did some training for a group there in December as well. And both of these groups of mental health workers noted that because of COVID, the wait to get a restraining order was almost 8 or 9 months. That's insane. That just doesn't even make sense. If someone's in danger now, what good is it for them to wait 8 months for a restraining order or a no contact order? It's a template. It's a piece of paper that's templated. You're just filling in the blanks. Click, 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 click. It's a what do they call these? It just has fields for you to type in stuff. Those should not take 8 months to obtain. If it means hiring a couple of additional staff so that paperwork can get done, to me, that's low-hanging fruit. Law enforcement officers need to take the concerns of family members seriously and have a proactive system and a strategy for following up. After Joan's death, what did I say her name was? Jane. I'm sorry. My name's Julie, and I'm thinking of every Jane name except for the one that I put on the PowerPoint. After Jane's death, there was a meeting we were asked to attend. One of the family members and myself were asked to attend a meeting with Niagara Regional Police to discuss the case and to just debrief a little bit. And these are some of the things that came up in that conversation, that the concerns were brought to police, but they were minimized. The concerns were brought to police, but they were kind of shrugged off. Well, I don't think that's really a big deal. He's an old man, all those sorts of things I talked about before. So taking the concerns of family members seriously, because who knows the family better than the other family members, right? But having a proactive system. So as I understand it, what happens now, at least in my community, is that when a complaint is made, the police go out and they have a talk with the person about whom the complaint was made. We understand that when that individual gets wind that the police have now been involved, it's going to make them more angry, and it's going to empower them to escalate their abusive behavior. It's not a deterrent. And so there's got to be a different way to follow up. How about talking to the victim first and starting the investigation there, getting all of the information that they can before moving towards talking to the person who is accused. And then if you're going to go and address the person who is accused, have a plan. Don't just show up. Like, that would be a good time to show up with the no contact order, right? But instead, it's like, well, a complaint has been filed and we just want to talk to you and we just want to warn you that, you really have to not take out your anger and aggression on your partner. And it's very low key. And it does nothing except for cause the perpetrator to escalate. So there needs to be specialized training for law enforcement officers. I know that there is already, but I'm talking specifically about recognizing the patterns of escalating behavior in domestic violence cases. And then the other recommendation that was made was applying behavioral analysis concerning domestic violence, not as something that would happen in the case of serious crime, but as a best practice, right? Both for prevention and for intervention. Because behavioral analysis is seen as still sort of specialist work, and it is saved for serial crimes like serial murder, serial rape, serial arson, things like that. When there's a pattern of repetition in crimes, then behavioral analysis is applied. However, I would suggest that when there's been a pattern of repeated behavior within a relationship, it makes sense to apply behavioral analysis so that you can predict what might happen next. If the behavior patterns that John had exhibited throughout his relationship with Jane had been documented and analyzed, perhaps they would have seen that he wasn't going to give up so easily just because he had moved out and found a new woman. It didn't mean that he was done with his wife. They might have seen that because he never let go of anything. And then they would have been able to perhaps make some recommendations for prevention and intervention in order to keep her safe. Now, in terms of the, excuse me, in terms of the community, this is important too. Ensuring that the legal team, the law enforcement officers, schools, and other key members of the community are aware of the risks and that they are included in the safety plan. For younger moms with young kids who are going to school, if they've moved out and they're in shelter, but the kids are still going to the same school, that puts them at risk. It puts mom at risk every time she goes to school to pick those kids up, right? I've worked with young clients who were estranged from their parents, who were terrified that their parents, the one they were estranged from, would show up at school and grab them before their mom would be able to come and get them. So there must be a safety plan that includes all of these key stakeholders in the community that have contact with the members of the family. So here in yellow highlights, I have recommendations from another website. I'm at a loss as to where I pulled this from. I believe it might have been the WHO site, and it was talking about safety plans and things that should be included in every safety plan. So this one, the first one says, if you're moving to a confidential location, consider using a mailing address that's different from the one where you're actually living, or set up a post office box. That's great advice. It's great advice. I think it's important, though, that aside from the person who's trying to protect themselves, that people in the community also contribute. Schools, lawyers, doctors, daycares, banks, also to make commitments to agreeing to these safety measures, because what good is it if you're keeping your address a secret, but no one else is, right? So there needs to be an agreement or an understanding that if someone has moved away or they've moved to a new location for their safety, that there needs to be some sort of a policy in place within all of these other organizations. Again, as a psychotherapist, we have to make sure that our staff are safe. And that means they're safe from harm from our clients, but also from harm from any family members. And so we did have a situation some years ago where one of our staff was concerned that a family member who was abusive might show up at the workplace, and we immediately implemented a policy. that said, these are the things we're going to put in place to make sure that this person stays protected. It's not hard. We just have to have the will to do it. This second recommendation in yellow says that the victim needs to be aware that addresses can be listed on police reports and restraining orders and other legal documents. So it says, before filling out your address on any form, ask if there's a way to keep your address confidential. If not, use a PO box or a friend's address instead. Here's the thing, y'all. Why is the responsibility for maintaining confidentiality placed solely on the victim? Why? Why can we not just make it best practice and mandatory practice for police reports and restraining orders to not have the address on it? Why can't we just redact it? Right? This is for the victim's personal safety and the safety of their children or the safety of their, of whoever. Why are we requiring for them to pay out the expense of a PO box when we know that when they're leaving a relationship that's been abusive, there's been financial abuse, it's not likely that they will have the money that they can just go and pay? It's a choice between breakfast food or a PO box. They're going to choose breakfast food, right? The kids need to eat. I can't afford a post office box. Why are we placing the onus and the responsibility on the victim? Why can we not, as a community, just say, you know what, we're going to do what we need to do to make you safe or to keep you safe. And that means that any documents that we have to fill out or complete for you, whether it's police report, restraining order, legal documents, separation documents, we are going to make sure that your address is redacted. That, my friends, is low-hanging fruit. That's easy stuff. We should be able to do that without having to have a policy come down, from Queen's Park or anything like that. We should be able to make those changes fairly easily without too much difficulty. Honestly, we will never know. We'll never know for certain if Jane's untimely death could have been prevented. We don't know. It's possible that even if everything had been done right, if everything had been done correctly, and if all of, if every effort had been made to keep her safe, he still might have found a way to get to her. But we know that her case is one of many cautionary tales that demonstrate the need for more education, more training, more commitment across disciplines, across community stakeholders to make sure that our most vulnerable are protected. Before we started the session, just as we were waiting for it to open up, I was chatting about an event that happened recently where a young woman was abducted by force by an ex-boyfriend. She went to pick up some stuff from their apartment, and he manhandled her into a vehicle, forced her in, and drove off with her and took her to a secluded place in the city and was dragging her down into a ravine when he was stopped by police. Had an eyewitness not seen that happening and had the presence of mind to call police immediately and identify the car and let them know where they were headed, the police might not have arrived in time. I don't know how many of these types of events happen every day in my community. I don't know, because they ended well, they were not reported. I'll never know. And I wonder if part of the challenge is that only the worst news makes it into the papers and into television, because the sexier it is, the more viewers you get, the more readers you get. But would there be a way for our community, and I don't know for sure, I'm just throwing it out there, would there be a way for us to collect that information, to do a study to find out how many people have experienced intimate partner violence and survived it? And I'm not talking about the stuff that goes viral or whatever. I'm talking about the everyday things or the near misses, right? That this almost happened, but it didn't. Why are those things not reported as well to the community so that we can remain vigilant, so that we can have that conversation about keeping people safe and changing the policies within our own workplaces, within our psychotherapy practices, within our medical practices, at the dentist's office, at schools, at daycares, at dance class. If we can raise the awareness level of the risks, the warning signs, and the resources, we may be able to make a change for the better within our communities. That's all I have for you, really. I just want to say thank you. Spa for the Soul is my psychotherapy practice. We are a private practice in the Niagara region. We serve both in-person and remote counseling. We are trauma informed. We're competent to work with survivors of domestic violence and their family members. And we're happy to provide support for anyone who is resonating with this conversation today and would like to work with a trauma informed team. I invite you to reach out to us after today if you're interested. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie. A lot of great talking points there. And we actually do have time for some questions and answers before the session ends. So if anyone has a question for Julie, I ask that you refrain from raising your hand because I won't be able to see it, but instead just please enter your question in the actual video platform chat of the screen that you're viewing now. And the questions will be entered in the main chat section. And then we can get some questions answered. I'm just going to see if there's anything here. This is a question. I'd like to hear more about the workplace policy in terms of privacy, confidentiality, please. You know what? That's a good one, because when you brought that up, like I had to get a restraining order on someone. And for my own safety, I had to share it with the HR department. They circulated it in the workplace. But you know what? It was so humiliating for me that everyone, 200 people at work knew my situation. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And I think that, I know you're going to speak to the answer now, but like there should be some sensitivity training for just people in the workplace to deal with someone who's in a really fragile state, a vulnerable position. So can you speak to that?
Absolutely. Yeah, good point. I mean, in the case in our office, we have a small practice, it's the largest it's ever been. And I think we've got 6 people in the practice. So it didn't require a whole lot of, memo writing and that sort of thing. But we just put it out there to people to say, look, there's a concern about this individual's safety. And so if this particular individual should show up on the premises, please direct them to leave. Right.
Mhm.
And that is it. There will be no questions answered about, does so-and-so work here? I'm sorry, sir. Yeah. Are you a patient here? No. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. That's it. And if that individual refuses to leave, then we will call police and we'll have them remove him from the property. It was that simple. I think in larger organizations, you're absolutely right that very often people don't want to report it to their workplaces because it is, as you say, Helena, it is humiliating. It's embarrassing.
Mhm.
But I think there are a couple of things. If there's anybody here that's from the field of HR, let me speak to you for a moment. It's important that we can lead with empathy in cases like this. Yes, it's scary. Yes, we have to make sure that we're adhering to labor law and to occupational health and safety and all of those things. And the workplace violence law is very clear that employers do have a responsibility to keep their employees safe, including from their spouses. Okay, so it's written into law. But we can lead with empathy by saying, you know what, I know that this feels humiliating. I know it feels embarrassing. But I want to reassure you that you haven't done anything wrong. This is not your fault, right? This is not your fault. So you don't need to be embarrassed and you don't need to be ashamed. This person is doing this to you.
Mhm.
It's not your fault. And I think just having that conversation alone would make it easier. But also if HR professionals are coming with that attitude, and they express that attitude to the team, right, to everybody else in the workplace. Hey, This isn't her fault. And we have a responsibility as a workplace to keep her safe. And we would do this for anybody here, right?
Right.
For you, we would do this for you. So we're asking you to be vigilant and to pay attention. You know, I still think back to, oh my gosh, it was years and years ago, probably late 80s, early 90s, that a woman was coming out of her workplace on Bank Street in Ottawa, and she was shot to death with a crossbow by her ex-husband. I don't know if anybody remembers this. That story has stayed with me my entire career.
Wow.
Because I just think, how, you know, she was in the safety of her workplace and she stepped out the door, but he knew her movements. He was able to follow. He was able to buy a crossbow because it's not a banned weapon, right? So there are all of these layers. But perhaps if they had known that he was out there, perhaps someone would have left with her. Perhaps they would have had her leave through an alternate exit so that she wouldn't be so exposed, right? All of these things. So I think in terms of privacy and confidentiality, it's a tricky one because we want people to be safe. We also want to respect their need for privacy. Sometimes those things don't work well together. But certainly all workplaces can make it clear to their employees that the workplace violence bylaw, or the, you know, Bill 168 is relevant for their workplace, and that they all have a responsibility to keep their coworkers safe from each other, from their clients or customers, and from their partners, should their partners pose a risk.
That's very good.
Having that understanding raises the level of vigilance one step up, and it's a place to start.
That's good. And I guess it's also good to actually meet with that person and find out what their needs are. You know, the one with her, you know, is saying, do you just want people to, like, because for me, I just wanted everyone to just treat me like normal, like don't change how you talk to me or treat me just to like, you know, because you worry about everyone's going to be staring at you. Now they all know. But other people maybe would love a little nurturing or whatever. So
yes.
I guess.
And I think the truth too is that there would probably in an organization where there's 200 people, I'll guarantee you weren't the only one.
Right.
Guaranteed.
Good point.
And so them knowing about you and knowing the steps that you're taking to stay safe might be enough to say, you know what, I'm in the same boat and I need to make a move.
Like
and
if someone else
here are some things that I can do, right? Like, I mean, the statistics bear it out. There's no way 1 in 200.
You're right.
But it's like more like 1 in 4.
I think we have time for one more question here.
Yes.
I'm working with a woman who's a former lawyer, included her address on court documents that was sent to opposing counsel, and her ex-partner now knows where she lives. We discussed safety planning, but it is a scary situation, even more so now after hearing this story. Now, you mentioned that you have to put that information on legal documents, correct?
Yes. And this is the thing that boggles my mind. I mean, when you know that someone is at physical risk, why would you take that chance? And why are you putting the onus on the victim to make sure that her address is protected? This is something that should be best practice in law, in my opinion. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm just saying it should be best practice in law that when the partner has been known to be abusive or violent, that the addresses are redacted, right? Just put it in the care of the lawyer's office.
Wow, it's so true.
That's easy enough. We do that for trust accounts. It's in care of the lawyer's office or in care of the bank, right? It's in trust. So why not put her address in trust so that she's not at further risk?
So good, so good.
It's so easy.
Well, it looks like we're out of time. Thank you so much, Julie, for sharing with us. And I'd like to thank everyone else for attending the session. There's going to be a 5-minute break now, and then we're going to have our closing remarks at the main stage beginning at 4:05. Thanks, and we'll see you there.
Thank you, everyone.
Great work. You finished just in time. That was wonderful. Awesome. That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Julie. I'm going to watch your presentation later.
She's just closing.
Okay, so can we
have 5 minutes, Ellen.
Can we delete that one slide?
Oh,
I am just mortified that I blacked it all out in my my PowerPoint, but somehow it didn't show up like that when I was testing it. And
I'll mention it to the producers, and
we can look after that, Julie.
Great.
Thank you for letting us know. That's no
Yeah,
problem.
I certainly did not expect the names to leak through.
No, it's fine. It's fine. We can take care of that. We can take care of that. We'll figure this out. Okay?
Thanks so much.
Terrific.
Thank
All
you
right,
very
thank you
much.
so much.
Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.